The blizzard had been raging for 3 days when Clara Vaughn realized she might die alone in the abandoned trading post. And the terrible part was not the dying but the certainty that no one would come looking for her. Until spring thawed the drifts that had swallowed the trail behind her. She pressed her frost-bitten fingers against the cracked window, watching the endless white swirl beyond the glass, and felt the weight of every rejection, every turned back, every pitying glance that had followed her since the fire had taken half her face 2 winters ago. The scars ran from her left temple down to her jaw, twisting the skin into riddles of pink and white. And though she had learned to live with the pain, she had never learned to live with the way people looked away. She had been traveling from Denver to Fort Lyon, Colorado, carrying medical supplies for the garrison doctor who had been kind enough to offer her work as his assistant. It was December of 1878, and the territories were harsh enough without the added cruelty of an early winter storm. Clara had thought she could make it before the worst hit, but she had been wrong. Her horse had gone lame 20 miles outside of Fort Lyon, and she had been forced to seek shelter in this crumbling structure that had once served traders moving between the mountains and the plains. Now it was nothing but rotting timber and broken dreams, much like herself. The fire she had managed to build was dying, and her supply of wood was running dangerously low. She wrapped the thin wool blanket tighter around her shoulders and tried not to think about how cold it would get once the flames guttered out entirely. Her supplies were nearly gone as well. A few strips of dried beef, a handful of hardtack, and a canteen that was more ice than water. She had been rationing carefully, but 3 days was stretching into what felt like 3 years, and hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Clara closed her eyes and let herself remember warmth. Not just the heat of a fire, but the warmth of her mother's embrace before the fever took her. The warmth of her father's laugh before the mine collapse silenced it forever. She had been 17 then, alone in the world with a face that had already begun to set her apart. The fire had come a year later, when she was working in a hotel kitchen in St. Louis. A pot of boiling grease had tipped, and her life had changed in the space of a scream. She dozed fitfully, huddled near the dying embers, and dreamed of summer. Of green grass and blue skies and faces that did not flinch away from hers. When she woke, it was to the sound of horses outside, and for a moment she thought she was still dreaming. But the sound came again, along with men's voices, low and urgent against the howl of the wind. Clara struggled to her feet, her legs cramping from the cold, and made her way to the door. She pressed her ear against the warped wood and heard them more clearly now. 2 men, maybe 3, and they were arguing about something. She could not make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Desperation and anger, a dangerous combination in the best of times, and these were far from the best of times. She stepped back from the door just as it burst open, sending a spray of snow across the floor and extinguishing what remained of her fire. 2 men stumbled inside, both covered in ice and frost, both carrying the hard look of outlaws. Clara's heart hammered in her chest as they spotted her, their eyes widening in surprise. "Well, hell," the first one said, shaking snow from his shoulders. He was tall and lean, with a scar across his chin and eyes that held no mercy. "Looks like this place is occupied." The second man was shorter and stockier, with a beard that was more ice than hair at the moment. He kicked the door shut behind them and pulled his gun, pointing it casually in Clara's direction. "Who are you?" "Nobody," Clara said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Just someone trying not to freeze to death." The first man laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Aren't we all, sweetheart?" "You alone," Clara nodded, calculating her options and finding them few. These men were dangerous, that much was clear, but they also looked half-frozen themselves. If they meant her immediate harm, they would have acted already. That gave her a slim advantage, and she meant to use it. "I have some food," she offered. "Not much, but enough to share if you have wood for the fire." The two men exchanged glances, and something passed between them. The shorter one lowered his gun slightly. "We got wood. We also got a dead horse out there and another one that won't last the night. We were heading for Fort Lyon when the storm caught us." "That makes two of us," Clara said. She gestured to the cold hearth. "If you want to live to see Fort Lyon, we should probably get that fire going again." They worked in silence, the three of them, building up the fire until it roared back to life and heat began to seep back into the small space. Clara divided her meager supplies, and the men produced some jerky of their own along with a bottle of whiskey that they passed around. Clara took a small sip when it came to her, feeling the burn all the way down, and passed it back. "What happened to your face?" the shorter man asked suddenly, and the taller one shot him a look that could have curdled milk. "Jake, shut your damn mouth. I am just asking. No harm in asking." Clara touched her scars without thinking, then dropped her hand. "An accident. A long time ago." Jake nodded and took another pull from the bottle. "We all got our scars. Some just show more than others." The night wore on, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. The two men, whose names she learned were Jake Hollies and Raymond Ray Sykes, told her they were ranch hands who had been caught away from their outfit when the weather turned. Clara did not believe them for a second, but she kept her suspicions to herself. In the wilderness, survival trumped morality, and as long as they did not threaten her, she was content to let them keep their secrets. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because she woke to find pale dawn light filtering through the cracks in the walls and the storm finally, blessedly, silent. Jake and Ray were already awake, packing up their gear and preparing to leave. They had divided what remained of the food and left her share on a piece of cloth near the fire. "Storm broke about an hour ago," Ray said when he saw her sitting up. "We are heading out. Fort Lyon cannot be more than 15, maybe 20 miles from here." "On foot?" Clara asked, standing up and working the stiffness from her joints. "Unless you got a horse hidden somewhere," Jake said with a crooked grin. "We will manage. You should wait here. Someone will come looking for you once the trail's clear." Clara shook her head. "I cannot wait. I have work waiting in Fort Lyon, and I have already been delayed too long. I am coming with you." The two men looked at each other again, and she could see them weighing the burden of a traveling companion against the harsh reality of the trail ahead. Finally, Ray shrugged. "Your funeral. But we are not slowing down for you, and we are not carrying you if you cannot keep up." "I will keep up," Clara said, and she meant it. They set out into a world transformed by snow. The drifts were waist-deep in places, and the cold was sharp enough to cut. Clara wrapped every scrap of cloth she had around herself, and followed in the path the two men broke through the white expanse. Her legs burned, her lungs ached, and her face felt like it was being flayed by the wind, but she kept moving. She had come too far to give up now. They had been walking for perhaps 2 hours when they heard the sound of a horse behind them. All three of them turned, and Clara's heart sank. 4 riders were coming up the trail, moving fast despite the snow, and even from a distance she could see the glint of badges on their chests. "Damn," Ray muttered, his hand going to his gun. "Damn, damn, damn. Do not be stupid," Clara said sharply. "There are 4 of them, and you are half frozen. You will be dead before you clear leather." Jake's face had gone pale beneath his frost-burned skin. "We did not kill anybody. You got to believe that. We just took some money from a stage that was carrying gold from the mines. Nobody got hurt." "Tell it to the judge," Clara said, but her mind was already racing. These men had shared their wood and their food with her. They had not harmed her when they easily could have. Perhaps they were thieves, but they were not murderers, and that distinction mattered. The riders drew closer, and Clara made a decision that was probably foolish but felt right all the same. She stepped forward, putting herself between the outlaws and the approaching lawmen, and raised her hands. The lead rider pulled up short, his horse snorting and stamping in the snow. He was a young man, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sky. He wore a marshal's badge pinned to his heavy coat, and the gun on his hip looked well used. His gaze swept over the three of them and settled on Clara, and she saw his expression shift from hard suspicion to something else entirely. Not pity exactly, but a kind of recognition that made her breath catch. "Morning," he said, his voice a low drawl that spoke of Texas or maybe Oklahoma. "You folks look like you have had a rough time of it." "The storm caught us," Clara said before either of the men behind her could speak. "We took shelter in an old trading post about 8 miles back. We are heading for Fort Lyon." The marshal nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I am Marshal Isaac Irwin. These are my deputies. We are tracking 2 men who robbed a stage 3 days ago outside of Denver. You would not happen to have seen anyone matching that description, would you?" "Just ourselves," Clara said evenly. "These 2 men found me at the trading post last night. We shared a fire and what food we had. That is all." Marshal Irwin studied her for a long moment, and Clara forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. Let him see the scars. Let him see everything. She had nothing left to hide and even less to lose. Finally, the marshal looked past her to Jake and Ray. "You two, what are your names?" Clara felt them hesitate, and she knew they were calculating their chances. Run or fight or lie, and none of those options ended well. She kept her hands up and her voice steady. "They told me their names were Jake and Ray. They have been nothing but decent to me, Marshal. Whatever you are looking for, I do not think you will find it here." One of the deputies, an older man with a gray mustache, leaned forward in his saddle. "Isaac, we are wasting time. The trail is getting colder by the minute." Marshal Irwin held up a hand, still watching Clara. "Where are you from, Miss?" "St. Louis originally. Denver most recently. I am going to Fort Lyon to work for Dr. Samuel Brennan as his medical assistant." "Dr. Brennan is a good man," the marshal said. "I know him well. He wrote to me last month, mentioned he was expecting a new assistant." He paused. "He mentioned the assistant was a woman. He did not mention anything else." "Would it have mattered if he had?" Clara asked, and she could not quite keep the edge from her voice. Something flickered in the marshal's eyes, something that might have been respect. "No, madam, it would not have." He looked at Jake and Ray again. "You two are free to go. But if I find out you lied to this woman or took advantage of her kindness, I will hunt you down myself. Are we clear?" "Clear as glass, Marshal," Ray said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. Marshal Irwin nodded to his deputies, and they turned their horses back the way they had come. But before he followed, the marshal swung down from his saddle and approached Clara. Up close, he was taller than she had thought, with broad shoulders and hands that looked capable of both violence and gentleness. "Fort Lyon is still a good 15 miles from here," he said. "The trail is dangerous even in good weather, and you are already half frozen. Let me take you the rest of the way." Clara glanced at Jake and Ray, who were already backing away, clearly eager to put distance between themselves and the law. Jake gave her a small nod, something like gratitude in his eyes, and then they were gone, disappearing into the white landscape like ghosts. "I can walk," Clara said, turning back to the marshal. "I have made it this far." "I do not doubt it," Isaac said. "But there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered. My horse can carry 2, and I am heading to Fort Lyon anyway. I have business with the garrison commander." Clara wanted to refuse. Pride was one of the few things she had left, and she guarded it jealously. but her legs were shaking with exhaustion, and the cold was seeping into her bones in a way that promised real danger. She nodded once, a sharp jerk of her head, and let the marshal help her up onto his horse. He swung up behind her, and Clara tried not to notice the solid warmth of him at her back, or the way his arms came around her to hold the reins. It had been so long since anyone had been this close to her, so long since she had felt anything but isolation and cold. She closed her eyes and let herself have this one small moment of human contact, even if it meant nothing beyond simple practicality. They rode in silence for a while, the horse picking its way carefully through the snow. The three deputies had ridden on ahead, and it was just the two of them in the vast white emptiness. Finally, Isaac spoke, his voice low enough that it felt like a confidence. "Those men were the outlaws I was looking for." Clara stiffened. "How did you know?" "I've been tracking them for 3 days. I know their faces, their builds, everything about them, but you stood up for them anyway, even though you had no reason to." "They did not hurt me," Clara said. "They could have, but they did not. That counts for something." "It does," Isaac agreed. "More than you might think." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Why did you lie for them?" "I did not lie. I told you the truth. They were decent to me. Whatever they did before that, it is not my place to judge. Most people would not see it that way." "I am not most people," Clara said, and she heard the bitterness in her own voice. Isaac's arms tightened slightly around her, a gesture that felt protective rather than restraining. "No," he said softly, "you are not." They reached Fort Lyon as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. The fort was a collection of sturdy buildings arranged around a central parade ground, with a stockade fence and guard towers at each corner. Soldiers moved about their duties, and the smell of wood smoke and cooking food drifted on the evening air. It was the most welcoming sight Clara had seen in days. Isaac helped her down from the horse and kept a hand on her elbow as she found her balance. "Dr. Brennan's office is that building there," he said, pointing to a whitewashed structure near the center of the compound. "I will walk you over." "You do not have to do that." "I know," Isaac said, "but I am going to anyway." Dr. Brennan was a man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He took one look at Clara, wrapped in her frost-stiffened clothes and leaning heavily on Marshal Irwin, and ushered her inside without a word. Within minutes, she was seated by a roaring stove with a cup of hot tea in her hands and a blanket around her shoulders. "You look like you have been through hell, young lady," the doctor said, examining her hands for frostbite. "What happened?" Clara told him about the storm, about the trading post, about the hard walk through the snow. She left out the part about Jake and Ray, and she noticed that Isaac did not volunteer the information either. When she was finished, Dr. Brennan shook his head. "You are lucky to be alive. Another day out there and we would have been looking for a body come spring." He glanced at Isaac. "Thank you for bringing her in, Marshal. I am grateful." "It was nothing," Isaac said, but his eyes were on Clara as he spoke. "I am just glad I found her when I did." The doctor insisted that Clara stay with him and his wife for the first few nights, until she had recovered her strength and found proper lodgings. Isaac tipped his hat to both of them and took his leave, but not before catching Clara's eye one last time. There was something in that look, something that made her heart do a strange little skip in her chest, but she dismissed it as exhaustion and relief. That night, as she lay in a real bed for the first time in days, Clara found herself thinking about the marshal, about the way he had looked at her without flinching, without that telltale shift of the eyes that said he was trying not to stare at her scars, about the solid warmth of him at her back during the ride, about the quiet strength in his voice when he had told her she was not like most people. She pushed the thoughts away. There was no room in her life for foolish dreams. She was here to work, to build a life for herself in this hard country, and that was enough. It had to be enough. The next morning, Dr. Brennan showed her around his clinic and explained her duties. She would assist with everything from setting broken bones to delivering babies, from mixing medicines to keeping the records. The work was demanding and often unpleasant, but Clara threw herself into it with a determination that impressed the older man. "You have good hands," he told her after she successfully stitched up a soldier who had caught himself on a piece of barbed wire. "Steady and sure, that is rare." "I have had practice," Clara said, not elaborating. She had stitched herself up more than once after the fire, learning through necessity what the doctors had been too uncomfortable to teach her directly. The days fell into a rhythm. She rose early, worked through the morning and afternoon, and spent her evenings studying the medical texts Dr. Brennan loaned her. She found a small room to rent in a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman who did not ask questions and did not stare. The town was rough but functional, a mix of soldiers, ranchers, traders, and opportunists, all trying to carve out an existence in the harsh Colorado territory. She saw Marshal Irwin occasionally, usually from a distance as he went about his duties. He always nodded to her when their paths crossed, and once or twice he stopped to exchange a few words about the weather or the state of the trails. But he never lingered, and Clara told herself she was glad. She had no business getting attached to anyone, least of all a lawman who probably saw her as just another responsibility in a town full of them. 2 weeks after her arrival, a family came in with a sick child. The little girl, barely 5 years old, was burning with fever and struggling to breathe. Dr. Brennan examined her and turned to Clara with grave eyes. "Pneumonia," he said quietly. "We need to get the fever down and keep her airways clear, or she will not last the night." They worked through the evening and into the night, taking turns sponging the child with cool water and administering the medicines Dr. Brennan had prepared. The parents hovered nearby, their faces drawn with fear, and Clara found herself remembering her own parents. The way her mother had looked in those final days of the fever. The way her father had tried so hard to be strong even as his own body was failing in that collapsed mine shaft. Sometime around midnight, the child's fever broke. Her breathing eased, and color began to return to her pale cheeks. The mother burst into tears and grabbed Clara's hands, thanking her over and over. Clara felt the familiar awkwardness of not knowing what to do with gratitude, but she managed a smile and assured the woman that Dr. Brennan deserved most of the credit. When the family finally left, promising to return the next day to check on the girl's progress, Dr. Brennan poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Clara. "To a life saved," he said, raising his glass. Clara clinked hers against his and drank. The whiskey burned, but it was a good burn, the burn of victory and relief. "You did well tonight," the doctor said. "Better than well. That child would have died without your quick thinking and steady hands." "We did it together," Clara said, "perhaps. But I saw the way you kept calm when the parents were panicking. I saw the way you anticipated what I needed before I asked for it. You have a gift, Clara. Do not waste it." Clara felt a lump in her throat. Praise was almost harder to accept than pity. "I will not," she promised. She walked back to the boarding house through streets silvered with moonlight. The temperature had dropped and her breath came in white clouds. She was almost to her door when a voice called her name. "Miss Vaughn, Clara." She turned to find Marshal Irwin approaching from the direction of the fort. He was not in uniform, just a heavy coat and hat, and there was something different about him in the moonlight. Something more relaxed, more real. "Marshal," she said, "you are out late." "So are you." "I saw the lights on at the clinic. Everything all right. A sick child. She will be fine now." Clara hesitated, then added, "You can call me Clara if you like. I think we are past formalities." Isaac smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Then you should call me Isaac. I am only a marshal when I am working, and right now I am just a man who could not sleep." "Why not?" He looked away toward the dark shapes of the mountains in the distance. "Thinking too much, I suppose. About the work, about the choices we make, about what happens when we get old and look back on our lives." "That is a lot for one night," Clara said. "It is." Isaac brought his gaze back to her. "Can I walk you home? I know it is not far, but I would feel better knowing you got there safely." Clara knew she should refuse. Every instinct told her to protect herself, to keep her distance, to not let anyone get close enough to hurt her again. But the moonlight was soft, and Isaac's eyes were kind, and she was tired of always being alone. "All right," she said. They walked slowly, their footsteps crunching in the thin layer of new snow. Isaac kept a respectful distance, his hands in his pockets, his voice low and easy. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "Well enough. The work is good, and Dr. Brennan is a fine teacher. I have no complaints." "That is not quite the same thing as being happy." Clara glanced at him. "Are you happy, Marshal?" "Isaac," he considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, when I stop a bad situation from getting worse or when I help someone who needs it, but mostly I am just here, doing the work because someone has to." "I know that feeling," Clara said quietly. They reached the boarding house, and Clara stopped at the bottom of the steps. She turned to face Isaac, and in the dim light from the windows she could see him studying her face. Not the scars this time, but her eyes, as if he was trying to read something written there. "Clara," he said, and then stopped, started again. "I have been wanting to ask you something ever since that day on the trail. Why did you help those outlaws? The real reason." Clara took a breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs. "Because I know what it is like to be judged for something you cannot change. Those men made a mistake, but they were not monsters. They deserved a chance, just like anyone else." Isaac nodded slowly. "And you think I would not have given them that chance?" "I do not know." "Would you have?" "I like to think so. But I have been doing this job long enough to know that mercy is not always an option. Sometimes the law is all we have between civilization and chaos. And sometimes the law is just another way of turning our backs on people who need help." Isaac's expression shifted, something fierce and admiring sparking in his eyes. "You do not pull your punches, do you?" "I cannot afford to," Clara said. "My whole life is one long lesson in harsh truths." "Why should I pretend otherwise?" "You should not," Isaac said. He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his eyes, smell the leather and smoke scent of him. "Clara, I want to be honest with you about something. Ever since I met you on that trail, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. About your courage, your kindness, your strength. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I would like very much to spend more time with you if you would allow it." Clara's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Why?" she asked, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Why?" Isaac looked genuinely confused. "Because you are intelligent and brave and good, because you make me want to be a better man. Because when I am with you, I feel like maybe there is more to life than just the next job, the next arrest, the next hard decision." "Look at me," Clara said, gesturing to her face. "Really look at me, Isaac. I am scarred and damaged, and I will be this way for the rest of my life. Men do not want women like me. They never have, and they never will." Isaac reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her scarred cheek with his hand. His touch was warm and sure, and Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "I am looking at you," he said softly. "I have been looking at you since the moment we met. And what I see is a woman who survived something terrible and came out stronger. What I see is someone who would risk herself to protect strangers, who would walk 15 miles through a blizzard rather than give up, who would work through the night to save a child's life. Your scars do not scare me, Clara. If anything, they make me admire you even more. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Isaac's thumb caught it. You do not know what you are saying, Clara whispered. I know exactly what I am saying. I am saying that I would like to court you properly and openly if you will have me. I am saying that, when I think about my future, I want you in it. I am saying that you are not damaged or ruined or any of the other terrible things I am sure people have told you. You are perfect, exactly as you are. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a warm blanket. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could see past the scars to the woman beneath. But the other part, the part that had been hurt and rejected so many times, was terrified. I need time, she said finally, to think about this, to be sure. Isaac dropped his hand but did not step back. Take all the time you need, I am not going anywhere. Clara opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the honesty in his face, the patience in his stance, the quiet determination that said he meant every word. And for the first time in a very long time, she let herself believe that maybe winter was not the only season she would ever know. Thank you, she said, for walking me home, for saying those things, for seeing me. Always, Isaac said. He tipped his hat to her and turned to go, then paused. Clara, for what it is worth, I think Fort Lyon just got a whole lot more interesting. She watched him walk away, his figure growing smaller against the snow-covered landscape, and felt something warm and dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. Terrifying, beautiful hope. The next weeks were a dance of careful steps and meaningful glances. Isaac made good on his word about courting her properly. He came by the clinic every few days with some excuse or another, always respectful, always kind. He brought her books he thought she might enjoy, told her stories about his work that made her laugh, and asked her opinion on everything from politics to the best way to treat saddle sores. Dr. Brennan noticed, of course. He was far too observant not to. But he said nothing beyond a knowing smile and a comment about how the marshal seemed to be spending a lot of time at the clinic for a man who was never sick or injured. Clara found herself looking forward to Isaac's visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. She had forgotten what it felt like to care about someone, to wonder if they would come by today, to catch herself touching her hair or smoothing her dress before answering the door. It was foolish and girlish and wonderful. One cold afternoon in late January, Isaac invited her to go riding with him. There is a place I want to show you, he said. About an hour outside of town. The weather is clear and I think you would like it. Clara hesitated. Going somewhere alone with him felt like crossing a line, moving from cautious interest into something more serious. But the hope that had taken root in her chest was growing stronger every day, pushing aside the fear and doubt. All right, she said. Let me get my coat. They rode out together, sharing Isaac's horse again, and Clara felt the same rush of awareness she had felt that first day. But this time, it was not tinged with exhaustion and desperation. This time it was pure pleasure, being this close to someone who made her feel safe and seen and wanted. The place Isaac took her to was a ridge overlooking a wide valley. The snow had melted in patches, revealing brown grass and dark earth, and in the distance, the mountains rose like jagged teeth against the blue sky. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, and Clara understood immediately why he had wanted to share it with her. I come here when I need to think, Isaac said as they stood side by side, looking out over the expanse. When the work gets too hard or the decisions get too complicated. Something about this view puts things in perspective. I can see why, Clara said. It makes everything else seem small. Yes, Isaac turned to face her, and there was something intense in his expression. Clara, I need to tell you something about myself, about my past. You do not have to. I know, but I want to. If we are going to do this, if we are going to try to build something real, then you should know who I really am. Clara felt a flutter of nervousness. All right, I am listening. Isaac looked back out at the valley, and his voice was steady but heavy with old pain. I was married once. Her name was Margaret, and we were young and stupid and thought love would be enough to carry us through anything. But love was not enough, not when the work kept me away for weeks at a time, not when the danger became too much for her to bear. She left me 3 years ago, went back east to her family. Last I heard, she had remarried. Some banker in Philadelphia who comes home every night at 6 and never has to worry about being shot. I am sorry, Clara said softly. I am not. Not anymore. Margaret deserved a life that did not involve waiting up at night wondering if I was dead in a ditch somewhere. And I deserved someone who understood that this work, this job, is part of who I am. I cannot give it up, not completely. This territory needs lawmen, and I am good at what I do. I would never ask you to give it up, Clara said. Isaac looked at her, and there was relief in his eyes. I know. That is one of the things I admire about you. You understand sacrifice. You understand duty. I understand that we all have to find our purpose, Clara said. Mine is healing. Yours is protecting. Neither is more important than the other. Isaac smiled, that full, transforming smile that made her heart skip. See, remarkable. He took her hand, and this time Clara did not pull away. They stood there together, hands linked, looking out over the valley as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. And Clara thought that maybe, just maybe, she had found her place in the world. Not just a town or a job, but a person who saw her as whole rather than broken. Clara, Isaac said quietly, I know you asked for time, and I respect that, but I need you to know that I am sure. I am sure about you, about us, about what I want. When you are ready, when you feel the same way, just tell me. Until then, I will wait. Clara squeezed his hand. You might not have to wait much longer. The ride back to Fort Lyon was peaceful, and when Isaac helped her down from the horse outside the boarding house, he kissed her hand in a gesture that was old-fashioned and sweet. Clara went inside with a smile on her face and warmth in her chest, and that night she slept better than she had in years. But happiness in the Wild West was always fragile, always temporary. 3 days later, a rider came into Fort Lyon with news that changed everything. There had been a massacre at a ranch 40 miles north. A family had been killed, their home burned, and the tracks suggested it was the work of a renegade band that had been terrorizing the territory for months. Isaac was called out immediately, along with a posse of deputies and volunteers. He came to see Clara before he left, his face grim and his gear packed for a hard ride. I do not know how long I will be gone, he told her. Could be a week, could be more, but I will come back, Clara. I promise you that. Be careful, Clara said, and she could hear the fear in her own voice. Always. He touched her face, that same gentle gesture he had used before. When I get back, we will talk, really talk, about the future, about what we both want. Can you wait that long? I will wait as long as it takes, Clara said, and she meant it. Isaac kissed her then, a brief, fierce press of lips that left her breathless. And then he was gone, riding north with the posse, and Clara was left to wait and worry and hope. The week stretched into 2. Clara threw herself into her work, helping Dr. Brennan with the steady stream of patients that came through the clinic. But at night, alone in her room, she found herself praying to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore. Praying that Isaac would be safe, that he would come back to her, that this fragile new happiness would not be ripped away like everything else she had ever cared about. The posse returned on a gray afternoon with rain threatening in the heavy clouds. Clara was helping a pregnant woman through a difficult labor when she heard the shouts from the street. She wanted to run out to see if Isaac was among the returning men, but the woman needed her more. She stayed, coaching and encouraging, and when the baby finally came, a healthy boy with strong lungs, Clara felt tears on her cheeks that had nothing to do with the birth. Dr. Brennan came to find her as she was cleaning up. His face was serious, and Clara felt her heart drop into her stomach. "Isaac?" she asked, and her voice cracked on the name. "He is alive," the doctor said quickly, "but he is hurt. They are bringing him in now." Clara did not remember moving, but suddenly she was running through the streets, her skirts hiked up and her breath coming in gasps. She reached the marshal's office just as they were helping Isaac down from a horse. There was blood on his shirt and his left arm was hanging at an odd angle, but he was conscious and on his feet. "Isaac," Clara called, and he turned toward her voice. "Clara, you should not see me like this." "Do not be stupid," Clara said, reaching him and taking his good arm. "Where are you hurt?" "Took a bullet in the shoulder. Broke my arm when my horse threw me. Nothing I have not survived before." "Let me be the judge of that," Clara said, and she helped him into Dr. Brennan's clinic with a strength born of fear and determination. They worked on Isaac for the better part of 3 hours. The bullet had lodged near the bone, and extracting it without causing more damage required every bit of skill and steadiness Clara had learned. Dr. Brennan praised her calm throughout the procedure, but inside Clara was anything but calm. Her hands might have been steady, but her heart was a wild thing, beating out a rhythm that sounded like please, please, please. When it was finally done, Isaac was stitched up and bandaged and resting on a cot in the back room of the clinic. Dr. Brennan insisted he stay there for at least a few days to guard against infection, and Isaac was too exhausted to argue. Clara pulled up a chair and sat beside him, holding his good hand. "You scared me," she said quietly. "I am sorry," Isaac said. His voice was rough from the laudanum they had given him for the pain. "But I told you I would come back. You did. You kept your promise." Isaac squeezed her hand weakly. "Clara, I need to tell you something. Out there, when things were at their worst, when I thought maybe I would not make it back, all I could think about was you. About how I had finally found something worth living for and I might not get the chance to see it through. Do not talk like that. No, listen. Please. I love you, Clara Vaughn. I do not care if it is too soon to say it or if it scares you or if you think I am crazy. I love you, and I want to build a life with you. I want to marry you and grow old with you and wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my days." Clara felt tears streaming down her face, hot and fast. "Isaac, you do not have to say it back, not yet, but I needed you to know. Life is too short and too unpredictable to keep important things unsaid." "You are right," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Life is too short. So I am going to tell you right now that I love you too. I think I have loved you since that day on the trail when you looked at me like I was worth something. And yes, I want to marry you. I want all of it, every single thing you just said." Isaac's eyes, glassy from the drug, filled with tears of his own. "You mean that? I have never meant anything more in my life." He pulled her down to him, and she kissed him gently, careful of his injuries. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and relief and promise, and when they finally drew apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. "You are my only season, Clara," Isaac whispered. "Not winter or spring or summer or fall, just you. Always you." Clara laughed through her tears. "That is the most ridiculous thing you have ever said. But do you like it?" "I love it," Clara said. "Almost as much as I love you." Isaac recovered slowly but steadily over the following weeks. Clara was with him every day, changing his bandages and monitoring for infection, and generally refusing to let him do anything that might set back his healing. Dr. Brennan joked that she was a fiercer taskmaster than he had ever been, and Isaac bore her ministrations with good humor and obvious affection. The news of their engagement spread through Fort Lyon like wildfire. Some people were happy for them, particularly the soldiers and settlers who knew Isaac well and had come to respect Clara's skill and dedication. But others were less kind. There were whispers about the scarred woman and the marshal, speculation about why a man like Isaac would choose someone like her. Clara heard the talk and tried to ignore it, but some nights it was harder than others. Isaac noticed, of course. He noticed everything about her. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of Dr. Brennan's clinic watching the sunset, he brought it up. "People are talking," he said bluntly. "People always talk. It bothers you," Clara sighed. "Sometimes it is hard not to wonder if they are right. If you are making a mistake choosing me." Isaac turned to face her, his expression fierce. "Listen to me very carefully, Clara Vaughn. The only mistake I could make would be letting you go. Those people do not know you the way I do. They do not see your courage or your kindness or your strength. And honestly, I do not give a damn what they think. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." "I think you are the best man I have ever known," Clara said softly. "Then we are agreed. To hell with everyone else." They were married in early March in a simple ceremony at the fort's chapel. Dr. Brennan stood up for Isaac, and Mrs. Patterson stood up for Clara. There were no fancy clothes or elaborate decorations, just two people promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When Isaac said his vows, his voice was strong and sure, and when Clara said hers, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blessing. They moved into a small house on the edge of Fort Lyon, a sturdy structure with 2 rooms and a fireplace that drew well. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Clara set about making it a home with the same determination she brought to everything else in her life. She sewed curtains for the windows and planted herbs in a small garden out back and learned to cook the simple, hearty meals that Isaac loved. Isaac returned to his duties as marshal, though he was more careful now about the risks he took. Clara continued to work with Dr. Brennan, and between the two of them they established a rhythm of work and home that felt sustainable and right. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, talking about their days, making plans for the future, simply enjoying each other's company. Spring turned to summer, and the harsh Colorado landscape bloomed with unexpected color. Clara discovered that she loved the wild beauty of the territory, so different from the crowded streets of St. Louis or the industrial grime of Denver. Here, under the vast sky with the mountains rising in the distance, she felt free in a way she never had before. She also discovered that she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, through subtle signs that she, as a medical assistant, recognized before most women would. When she was certain, she told Isaac over dinner one evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth, and then a grin spread across his face that was pure joy. "A baby. We are having a baby. Yes, probably around December or January if my calculations are correct." Isaac dropped his fork and came around the table to pull her into his arms. "Clara, my God, this is the best news, the absolute best. You are not worried about the timing, about the danger, about all of it. Of course I am worried. I am terrified, but I am also happier than I have ever been in my entire life." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You are going to be an amazing mother." "I hope so," Clara said. "I want to be. For this child, for you, for all of us." The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and as her body changed, she found the physical demands of her work increasingly difficult. Dr. Brennan, bless him, adjusted her duties without making her feel useless, giving her more of the administrative tasks and less of the heavy lifting. Isaac was solicitous to the point of being overbearing, constantly checking on her and trying to wrap her in cotton wool. "I am pregnant, not dying," Clara told him more than once, exasperated and amused in equal measure. "I know, but you are precious cargo now, both of you." Autumn came with its golden light and crisp air, and Clara felt the baby quicken inside her. The first time she felt that flutter of movement, she grabbed Isaac's hand and pressed it to her swollen belly, laughing at the wonder on his face when he felt it too. "That is our child," he said, awed. "Right there, alive and growing." "Our child," Clara agreed, and the words felt like magic. December arrived with snow and bitter cold, and Clara's time drew near. She was enormous now, uncomfortable and ungainly, but Isaac never stopped telling her she was beautiful. She would roll her eyes and call him a liar, but secretly she loved it. Loved that he could see past the scars and the swollen body to the woman he had fallen in love with. The labor started on a bright, cold morning 2 days before Christmas. Clara was helping Mrs. Patterson with some baking when the first contraction hit, a tightening across her middle that took her breath away. She managed to get word to Isaac and Dr. Brennan, and within the hour she was back in her own home with both men hovering anxiously. "This is going to be interesting," Dr. Brennan said with dry humor. "I have delivered hundreds of babies, but never one where the mother could probably do the job better than I can." "Do not even think about it," Clara gasped as another contraction rolled through her. "I am the patient this time, not the assistant." The labor was long and hard, lasting through the day and into the night. Isaac refused to leave her side, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for putting her in this situation. Dr. Brennan was his usual calm, competent self, and sometime around midnight, with snow falling softly outside the window, Clara gave a final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's cry. "It is a boy," Dr. Brennan announced, holding up the squalling infant. A healthy, strong boy. Isaac was crying, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. Clara was crying too, exhausted and overwhelmed and filled with a love so fierce it felt like it might break her apart. Dr. Brennan cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Clara's arms. He was perfect. Tiny and red-faced and absolutely perfect. He had a shock of dark hair like his father and blue eyes that would probably change color in the coming weeks. Clara touched his small fingers, his delicate nose, and felt her heart expand to make room for this new person. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Isaac sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Clara, his eyes locked on his son. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking James," Clara said. "After my father." "James Irwin," Isaac said, trying it out. "I like it." "James Michael Irwin, maybe. Michael was my grandfather's name." "James Michael Irwin," Clara repeated. "Perfect." They sat like that for a long time, the three of them, while Dr. Brennan cleaned up and quietly let himself out. The snow continued to fall, blanketing Fort Lyon in white, and inside the small house, a family was being born. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he had his father's lung capacity and was not shy about using it. Clara and Isaac took turns walking him through the night, singing lullabies and telling stories, and generally being the kind of bleary-eyed new parents that made their friends laugh. But through it all, Clara felt a contentment she had never known before. This was her family. her husband, her son, her home. After years of being alone, of believing no one would ever want her, she had somehow stumbled into a life more full and rich than she had ever dared to dream. Isaac thrived as a father. He was gentle with James, patient in a way that surprised Clara until she realized it should not have surprised her at all. This was the man who had seen past her scars, who had given her time and space to learn to trust him. Of course, he would be a wonderful father. When James was 6 months old, Isaac came home one evening with news. "The territorial governor is creating a new position," he said. "A regional marshal to oversee law enforcement across the southern territories. They offered it to me." Clara looked up from where she was feeding James. "That is a promotion. Congratulations." "It would mean more travel," Isaac said carefully. "More time away from home, but also better pay, more resources to actually make a difference in how we keep the peace out here." "You want to take it?" Isaac sat down across from her. "Only if you are all right with it. You and James come first, always." Clara thought about it, weighing the risks and benefits. She thought about the man she had married, the man who needed purpose and challenged the way other men needed food and water. "Take it," she said finally. "We will manage." "We always do." Isaac took the position, and true to his word, he was away more often. But he was also home more intentionally, making every moment count. And when he was gone, Clara had her work and her son and the community she had slowly built around herself. She was not the lonely, scarred woman who had stumbled into Fort Lyon 2 years ago. She was Clara Irwin, respected medical assistant, wife, mother, and member of a community that had learned to see past the surface to the woman beneath. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons. James grew into a bright, curious toddler with his father's sense of justice and his mother's steady hands. When he was 3, Clara found herself pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. She knew what to expect, and her body seemed to remember the work even if her mind was anxious. Their daughter was born on a warm May evening, coming into the world with barely a whimper and opening her eyes to look around with solemn curiosity. They named her Margaret Rose, Rose for Clara's mother and Margaret for Isaac's first wife. It was Isaac's suggestion, and Clara agreed immediately. That early pain was part of who Isaac was, and honoring it seemed right. Margaret, or Maggie as they called her, was different from James in every way. Where he was boisterous and bold, she was quiet and watchful. Where he charged into things head first, she hung back and observed. But she was just as loved, just as cherished, and watching Isaac with his daughter made Clara fall in love with him all over again. Fort Lyon changed too as the years went by. The Indian Wars wound down and the territory became more settled. The railroad came through, bringing more people and more commerce. The rough edges of the frontier began to smooth out, though it never lost its essential wildness. Clara continued her work with Dr. Brennan until he retired, at which point she took over much of the day-to-day running of the clinic. She never became a full doctor. The barriers for women were still too high, the prejudices too entrenched, but she was respected and trusted, and that was enough. Isaac rose through the ranks of law enforcement, becoming one of the most respected lawmen in the territory. He was fair but firm, known for giving people second chances, when he could but never backing down from a threat. The work was still dangerous, and Clara still spent too many nights lying awake waiting for him to come home, but they had built a life that could withstand the absences and the fear. One evening, when James was 8 and Maggie was 5, the family was sitting together after dinner. James was reading aloud from one of his adventure books, doing all the voices and making Maggie giggle. Isaac had his arm around Clara, and she was leaning into his warmth, feeling the solid reality of him. "Tell us the story," Maggie said suddenly. interrupting her brother. About how you and Papa met. Clara and Isaac exchanged glances. They had told the children bits and pieces, but never the whole story. Are you sure? Clara asked. It is not a very happy story in some parts. I want to know, James said, putting down his book. Please, so Clara told them. About the fire that had scarred her, about the long journey to Fort Lyon, about the blizzard and the outlaws and the trading post, about the marshal who had found her and brought her home, about how she had thought no one would ever want her, especially in the cold and darkness of winter, until Isaac had shown her that love did not need perfect circumstances or perfect people. What did Papa say? Maggie asked, her eyes wide. When he told you he loved you, Isaac smiled. I told your mother that she was my only season, not winter or spring or summer or fall, just her, always her. That is silly, James said, but he was grinning. Maybe, Isaac agreed, but it is also true. Clara reached across and took Isaac's hand, squeezing it gently. 12 years. They had been together for 12 years, and the love she felt for him had only deepened with time. The scars on her face were still there, faded now but permanent. Some people still stared, still whispered, but it did not matter anymore. She knew who she was, and she knew she was loved. Can we have dessert now? James asked, and the moment of sentiment passed into the comfortable chaos of family life. That night, after the children were in bed, Clara and Isaac sat on their porch watching the stars come out. The air was warm, carrying the scent of pine and sage, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. You ever regret it? Clara asked quietly. Choosing me, choosing this life. Isaac turned to look at her, his expression startled. Regret. Clara, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and the children, this life we built together, it is everything I never knew I wanted. Even when people talk, even when it is hard, especially then, Isaac said firmly. Any fool can love someone when it is easy. But loving someone through the hard parts, standing beside them when the world is cruel, that is what matters. And you have done that for me as much as I have done it for you. How do you figure? You accepted me knowing I would be gone sometimes, that I would come home hurt or not come home at all. You built a life that could withstand my absences, raised our children to be strong and independent, never asked me to be anything other than who I am. That is love, Clara. Real, lasting, powerful love. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. You are going to make me cry. Good. You are beautiful when you cry. You are impossible. And you love me anyway. I do, Clara said, leaning over to kiss him. God help me, I do. Years continued to unfold, bringing changes and challenges and joy in equal measure. James grew into a young man with his father's sense of justice and decided to study law, hoping to become a territorial judge. Maggie discovered a love of drawing and painting, capturing the wild beauty of Colorado in watercolors that left visitors to their home speechless with admiration. Isaac eventually retired from active duty, though he stayed on as a consultant and trainer for younger lawmen. He liked to joke that he was getting too old to chase outlaws through the mountains, but Clara knew the real reason. He wanted to be home more, to be present for the everyday moments that made up a life. Clara finally hung up her medical bag when she turned 50, handing over her practice to a young doctor fresh from medical school back east. She had trained him well, and she trusted him to carry on the work she and Dr. Brennan had started all those years ago. They were sitting on that same porch, 25 years after that first blizzard, when Isaac said something that made Clara laugh until she cried. You remember those outlaws? Jake and Ray? Of course I do. Why? I got a letter today from the territorial prison. Jake Hollies has been released after serving his sentence. He wrote to me asking if I remembered him, if I remembered the woman who lied for him in the storm. What did he say? Isaac pulled the letter from his pocket and read aloud. Marshal Irwin, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to thank you for not arresting me that day in the snow. I know you knew who we were and you let us go anyway. I have spent the last 22 years thinking about that, about why you did it. I finally figured out it was because of her, the scarred woman who stood up for us. She saw something in us worth saving and you trusted her judgment. I wanted you to know that she was right. I have been clean since I got out, working an honest job on a ranch outside of Santa Fe. Tell her thank you from me. Tell her she changed my life. Respectfully, Jake Hollies. Clara wiped at her eyes, surprised by the emotion welling up in her. I had forgotten all about them. They clearly have not forgotten about you, about us. That day changed everything, Clara said softly. If the storm had not happened, if I had not ended up at that trading post, if you had not come along when you did. But I did come along, Isaac said. And you did stand up for those men, and we did fall in love. That is not chance, Clara, that is fate. I do not believe in fate. Then call it luck, call it providence, call it whatever you want. But we found each other, and that is what matters. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. They were older now, their hair graying and their bodies not quite as strong as they once were. But the love between them was as solid as the mountains, as enduring as the endless Colorado sky. You were right, you know, she said quietly. All those years ago, I am your only season. And you are mine, Isaac said, kissing the top of her head. Always and forever. They sat like that as the sun set, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the house, they could hear Maggie humming as she worked on a new painting, and from town came the distant sounds of life carrying on. It was an ordinary evening in an extraordinary life, and Clara felt grateful for every moment of it. The years of their retirement were gentle and full. They traveled a little, visiting James at his law practice in Denver, and spending time with Maggie when she married a rancher and started her own family. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, and watched their family tree grow and spread like the cottonwoods that lined the river. Clara's scars faded to pale shadows against her weathered skin, barely noticeable now except in certain lights. But she had long since stopped caring about them. They were part of her story, part of what had brought her to Isaac and the life they had built together. If she could go back and change that day in the kitchen, prevent the fire from ever happening, she would not. Because without the scars, without the pain and the loneliness that had followed, she never would have been on that trail in winter. She never would have met Isaac. She never would have known this love. Isaac's health began to fail when he was 73. Nothing dramatic, just the slow decline of a body that had been through too much hard use. Clara nursed him with the same steady competence she had brought to every patient, but this time her hands shook, and her heart broke a little more each day. I am not afraid, Isaac told her one evening as they lay together in the bed they had shared for nearly 40 years. I have lived a good life, Clara, a full life. I got to love you and be loved by you. I got to watch our children grow. I got to make a difference in this wild, hard place. What more could a man ask for? More time, Clara whispered. I want more time with you. We have had 40 years. That is more than most people get. It is not enough. It will never be enough. Isaac cupped her face, his hand trembling slightly with age and weakness. You listen to me, Clara Irwin. When I am gone, you are not going to shut yourself away and mourn for the rest of your days. You are going to keep living, keep loving, keep being the remarkable woman I fell in love with. Promise me. Isaac, promise me. I promise, Clara choked out, but I do not want to. I know, but you will anyway because you are strong, stronger than anyone I have ever known. Isaac died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep with Clara's hand in his. She felt the moment he left, felt the absence of him like a physical blow, and she wept as she had not wept since she was a young woman staring at her ruined face in a mirror. The funeral was attended by what felt like half of Colorado. Lawmen and ranchers, soldiers and settlers, people from every walk of life who had been touched by Isaac's fairness and compassion. They told stories about him, about cases he had solved and lives he had saved, and Clara listened with pride and grief warring in her chest. James gave the eulogy, his voice strong despite the tears on his cheeks. "My father taught me that justice and mercy are not opposites but partners. He showed me that real strength lies not in violence, but in knowing when to fight and when to forgive. And most importantly, he demonstrated every single day what it means to truly love someone. To see them, to honor them, to choose them again and again no matter what the world says. He loved my mother that way, and she loved him right back, and their love made all of us better people." After the burial, after the last mourner had left, Clara stood alone by the grave. The stone was simple, marking Isaac Irwin as a beloved husband, father, and lawman. But to her, he had been so much more. He had been her salvation, her partner, her best friend. He had been the man who looked at her and saw beauty instead of scars, potential instead of damage. "Thank you," she whispered to the cold stone, "for everything, for seeing me, for loving me, for making me believe I deserve to be loved. I will miss you every day for the rest of my life." Clara kept her promise to Isaac. She did not shut herself away or let grief consume her. She continued to live in their house, continued to see her children and grandchildren, continued to be part of the community she and Isaac had helped build. The pain of his absence never truly faded, but it became manageable, a familiar ache rather than a sharp knife. She took up painting with Maggie, discovering that she had a decent eye for color and composition even if her technical skills were lacking. She volunteered at the clinic, mentoring the new generation of medical assistants. She wrote letters to James about territorial politics and legal theory, engaging him in the kinds of debates Isaac would have loved. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and remember the blizzard and the terror of thinking she would die alone. Remember the marshal on his horse, offering her a ride to safety. Remember the slow, careful dance of courtship, the wonder of falling in love, the joy of building a family. "You were right, Isaac," she said to the empty air. "I was your only season, but you know what? You were mine too." And what a season it was. Clara lived to be 87, far longer than most people in that time and place. She died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by 3 generations of family, and when they buried her next to Isaac, the entire town turned out again. She had been a fixture in Fort Lyon for more than 50 years, and her passing marked the end of an era. On her headstone, below her name and dates, James had added one line at Maggie's suggestion. She thought no one would want her in winter, until a cowboy said, "You're my only season." It was not entirely grammatically correct, and it probably confused people who did not know the story. But for those who did, for the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had heard the tale of the blizzard and the trading post and the marshal who fell in love with a scarred woman, it was perfect. Because in the end, Clara's story was not about scars or survival or even the wild frontier. It was about love, the kind of love that sees past the surface to the soul beneath, the kind of love that endures through hardship and distance and time, the kind of love that changes lives and creates legacies and proves that even in the coldest winter, spring can come. And it all started with a woman who thought no one would want her, and a cowboy who said, "You're my only season." The old house in Fort Lyon still stands, maintained now by the Historical Society as a monument to the early days of the territory. Visitors can walk through the rooms where Clara and Isaac raised their family, see the porch where they spent countless evenings watching the sunset, read the letters and documents that tell the story of their extraordinary, ordinary life. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the snow falls soft and silent, people say you can see two figures on that porch, a man and a woman, sitting close together, looking out at the mountains with the contentment of those who found exactly what they were looking for in each other. It is probably just a trick of the light, a romantic fancy born of knowing their story. But then again, some loves are strong enough to echo through time, and if any love deserved that immortality, it was theirs. The seasons turn as they always do. Winter gives way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn, and back to winter again. But for Clara and Isaac, there was only ever one season that mattered: each other. Always and forever, through every storm and every blessing, they were each other's only season. And in the end, that was more than enough.